Hello everyone! Thank you for visiting our channel. Have you ever experienced such life stories? James and Caitlin had been married for 5 years. Recently, her husband had received a promotion and had been busy with work, frequently going on short business trips. Caitlin was unhappy about the little time they spent together. While the trips paid well, it didn't feel like a proper relationship when they were apart most of the time. She missed her husband's attention, but he was so exhausted that there was hardly any time for them to talk about their lives or even how their day went. During this period, Caitlin's co-worker Nicholas started to take an interest in her. He was a young and energetic man who showed more than just a work-related or friendly interest. It had been a while since Caitlin had experienced any kind of courtship, and she found it pleasant to receive attention from him. However, she remained faithful to her marriage and didn't allow anything more than talking and getting to know each other. As time went on, Nicholas and Caitlin began communicating more on social media, and their conversations became more personal and intimate. On a weekend when her husband was away on another business trip, Caitlin found herself bored at home. She started messaging Nicholas, who always managed to cheer her up somehow. He suggested that they go to the movies together to watch an interesting comedy that had just been released. "Shall we go?" he asked her. Caitlin didn't respond to his message for a long time, considering how it might look to others. A married woman going to the movies alone with another man didn't seem right, but she convinced herself that it was harmless since they were just friends. Nicholas was just trying to save her from a dull evening. Eventually, Caitlin agreed to Nicholas's invitation. As Caitlin walked out of the movie theater, she couldn't help but feel grateful for the wonderful date she just had with Nicholas. He had been a true gentleman the entire time, never once crossing any boundaries. They took a leisurely stroll through the park, and as the night grew late, Nicholas offered to walk Caitlin home. Upon arriving at her doorstep, Nicholas jokingly suggested that he come in for a cup of tea. Caitlin, not wanting to be impolite, agreed. She began to offer him various types of tea when Nicholas noticed a bottle of wine on one of the shelves. "Caitlin, it was such a lovely evening. Let's make it even better and share some wine," he suggested with a sly smile. After a few glasses of wine, the conversation took a decidedly unfriendly turn. Nicholas began to shower Caitlin with compliments, telling her how beautiful she was and how he had fallen deeply in love with her at first sight. Caitlin felt a pang in her heart as she realized that she missed hearing these words from her husband, who had been away on a business trip. Under the influence of the wine and Nicholas's words, Caitlin's guard began to drop, and she soon stopped thinking about her husband and what she was doing. That night, everything happened right in Caitlin and James's apartment. The next morning, Caitlin woke up to find that she wasn't alone in bed. She felt a wave of horror wash over her as she realized what she had done and how she had betrayed her husband. She sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring blankly. When Nicholas finally woke up and came to her, instead of a kiss and a good morning, he heard that Caitlin considered everything that had happened the night before a mistake. She regretted it deeply. "Just tell your husband about it and come to me," Nicholas said, not understanding what had changed overnight. Caitlin couldn't bring herself to tell her husband about what had happened. She knew it would cause him incredible pain, and it was no longer her decision to make. Instead, she spent the next 2 weeks avoiding any communication with Nicholas, feeling terribly guilty before her husband. When James returned from his business trip, Caitlin was overjoyed to see him. She became more attentive to her husband, constantly expressing her love for him. She had realized how good and close he was to her, and decided that she would never confess to her betrayal. It was a mistake that she would have to live with, but she was determined to make it right by being the best wife she could be. Caitlin had just come back home from work, and as soon as she walked in, she saw her husband sitting in the kitchen with a shot glass and a large stack of papers in front of him. She felt her heart sink, immediately sensing that something was off. At first, she wondered if it was work-related, but as she approached him, she saw that the pile of papers was her printed correspondence with her colleague. As if that wasn't enough, there was a printed photograph on top of one of the piles, showing a semi-naked Caitlin, peacefully asleep in bed on the very same night she had cheated on her husband. Caitlin's colleague had had enough of her behavior and decided to tell her husband everything. James, Caitlin's husband, was surprised when he saw a large envelope at his doorstep. He wasn't expecting any deliveries, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the envelope. As soon as he took out the printed photo of his wife, the ground almost disappeared from under him. He quickly walked to the kitchen and sat at the table, taking out all the contents of the envelope, which turned out to be several sheets of paper. On the third page, he couldn't read calmly anymore and took out a bottle of strong alcohol from the cupboard. When Caitlin came home and found her husband sitting in the kitchen, she tried to explain and apologize, but James remained silent. He couldn't comprehend why his wife had cheated on him. When her sobbing became unbearable, he finally spoke in a grim voice. "Pack your things and leave. I have nothing else to say." For several days, James was inconsolable, trying to come to terms with what had happened. Eventually, he realized that there was nothing he could do to fix their marriage. He wasn't ready to forgive Caitlin and probably never would be, so he decided to file for divorce. Caitlin had the sense not to fight for what was rightfully not hers, and she generally tried to avoid her ex-husband's company. Despite everything, James didn't seek revenge on Caitlin. He believed that revenge was a waste of time and energy. Instead, he felt that Caitlin would have to live with the fact that she had been an unfaithful wife, and that would definitely come up in her future relationships. He couldn't imagine anyone wanting to be with her after knowing what she had done. In the end, James and Caitlin's marriage ended in shambles. Caitlin's infidelity had destroyed the trust between them, and James couldn't forgive her. It was a painful and unfortunate situation for both of them, but James knew that he had to move on and find a new path in life. Here's a story from real life. What do you think about this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. And thank you for listening to the story until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and be sure to like this video, as it will help us promote the channel. All the best.